Welcome back, friends, to another episode of Beginner Sewing with Mary. I'm Mary St. Ange, and I'm the host of this channel. So anyways, I'm going to talk to you about something that can be a little intimidating for people who've never made quilts before. I'm talking about quilt making, if you didn't guess. So anyways, when I think about quilts, I think a lot of different things, but I know there are many of us out there who get very intimidated when we see some of those really elaborate, detailed quilts with all the threads and colors and everything and fancy designs. I get intimidated by those too. So anyways, I try to keep it simple. And right now I am working on a quilt for my niece who just had a baby. She's in her 30s and she just had a baby, and so I want to show you what I'm working with here. The first thing you do when you make a quilt, you want to figure out what your main fabrics are going to be. This is the fabric I fell in love with, and then what I did was I found some other fabrics and pulled the colors out of that fabric. I have this beautiful green, this like a frosted pink, and this aqua, it's like an aqua green. And I think these are going to be great colors together. So what I did is I cut these into 6x6 squares, and then I also found this fabric that I'm going to use in the back, or I should say this fleece. It's a fleece fabric, and I know that most little girls like unicorns and horses, so I got this fabric for the back, so it'll be real soft for the baby girl. The other thing that is new that I've never used before, and I look forward to it, is a walking foot. Now this is something that a lot of people have used for a long time for quilting. This will be my first time using this. I know, I've made several quilts and I've never used a walking foot. Didn't even know they existed. I wish I had. It's supposed to be a lot easier. The other thing I didn't know about, which is going to make this quilt a lot easier to make, is called Quilt Basting Spray. It is a temporary spray. I'm not sponsored by any products, just so you know that. It is a quilt basting spray, and you spray this on the different layers and they help the layers stick together. It sounds fabulous. I just can't wait to use it. And then what you do is you wash it afterwards. You wash the quilt afterwards, and it's supposed to rinse right out. Okay, those are some of the neat things I wanted to show you. I look forward to you coming with me on this journey of making this baby girl quilt. After this, then, I'm going to be working on a baby boy quilt for a good friend of mine. All right, so let's get started. Belle, what are you doing? Here we go. I figured out my pattern, and I did take out the turquoise color because it just did not look right. It stood out too much, so we're only working with 3 colors. Put the blocks together that I wanted to use for this pattern. And I do have a video of putting the walking foot on there, but I had to take it out, otherwise this video would have been too long. So I did find out something interesting about quilting, and that is quilts have been around for a very, very long time. But they didn't become popular in America until the settlers came over and needed to make lots of quilts for warmth. Although we really don't know what the Native Americans were doing back then. They were probably already making quilts with different fabrics and animal skins and stuff like that. So here we're pressing out our seams so that when we go to sew on more pieces, everything will add up nicely. I'm going to be putting a little steam on there to get those wrinkles out. Some of these wrinkles would not come out. All of this fabric was washed and pressed, but sometimes things just don't want to come out of the wrinkles don't want to come out. Wanted you to see here that I tried to cut it as straight as possible, but sometimes you're still going to have edges that are uneven. See, you've got a little piece hanging over here. That will need to be trimmed off and measured with a rotary cutter and a ruler. There we go. I've got those strips put together, our blocks put together, and now we're going to put these 3 last strips are the only ones I have to do. Yeah, and I got my pattern just like I liked it, just like it looks in the picture. Okay, here I'm using a walking foot because I'm going to be using this throughout the quilt. A walking foot grabs the fabric and pulls it and just makes it so much easier. Here I decided to put on a ruffle. Now this fabric is special because this fabric is from an old nightgown of my mother's. I tried to pick out the best pieces of the nightgown to make a ruffle, and it's going to be extra special because my niece took care of my mother before she passed away, so I wanted that ruffle on there from Grandma's fabric. All right, here I am laying, I've made my quilt top, I've turned it over, so I've got right sides together, and I'm using these large washers that I got from the hardware store to weigh down the fabric so that the quilt can lay nice and flat while I'm pinning it together. You can purchase fabric weights, but these heavy washers were so inexpensive. They were about $2.50 a piece. And I know where I can get more all the time. Just have to go down the street to the hardware store. Now I'm pinning all along the seam, but what I'm also doing is I'm putting an extra pin about 1.5 inches off to the seam to make sure that the ruffle lays flat while I'm sewing, because we don't want the ruffle to get caught up in the main seam. Then you'd have to get out your seam ripper and re-sew that ruffle, re-sew that seam so that the ruffle's not stuck in there. Okay, we're moving it up. Once we get everything pinned down, then we're going to trim the excess off. Here we go, and I'm using these heavy washers to also help straighten out the fabric so it lays nice and flat, because you don't want to end up sewing your fabric together and then having bunches, uneven seams and things like that. So these washers are heavy enough that they keep everything flat. Now what I am going to do is I'm going to leave the seam on the very bottom. I'm going to leave that open and sew the 3 seams first. So I'll sew the side seam, the top seam, and the other side. So the left and right and the top seams will be sewn, and then the bottom seam will be left open so that we can turn the quilt inside out. Or out, I'm sorry, right side out. I just love how those washers worked. Now I am going to leave about 1 inch on the bottom so that I have enough fabric to turn it under. But on the other sides, I'm going to try to cut, at least on that one side, I'm going to try to cut as closely as I can. Okay, Okay, now we're going ahead and we are sewing the quilt pattern to the fleece fabric that will be the back of the quilt. Because remember, as I mentioned, this is going to a baby girl, so I wanted it to be very, very soft. Do our back stitch to make sure that it doesn't unravel. Always want to back stitch before and back stitch after. And I notice that some of my pins are in the wrong direction. That's okay, we just move them around. There we go. Now we're going to turn the quilt I'm going to put one more little seam on the edge. I like to just do the corners of the bottom of the quilt, because those are always the hardest to do if you have to hand stitch. Back stitch again, and we have our opening, and now we're going to turn it right side out. There we go, we've got our little pocket there. We're turning the quilt right side out, and then we're going to trim all around, sew all around the quilt. I did the edges first, and now I'm just going to go straight across right along the hem of the blocks. And there we go. All done. Let me know what you think. Again, I'm sorry for the quality of the film. I'm still learning how to use this new camera. I hope you enjoyed this. Leave your comments and let me know.